I reviewed about 60 segments on climate change from MSNBC, CNN, NPR, and PBS because I wanted to know, do liberal media take the science as seriously as they claim? And are they conveying the urgency to their audience? First though, I just need to say thank you so much to the Surf Times. They shared my channel recently. They are awesome. And if that's why you're here, thank you. I appreciate you checking it out. And thank you so much to Lindsay for the comment. Okay, first, a lot of climate change reporting are things like this.
Matt Russell works Coyote Run Farm in southern Iowa with his husband and adopted sons. They are still reeling from the wettest 12-month period the United States has ever recorded.
This is what climate change is. The wrong weather, the wrong time, with devastating consequences.
Profiles on a farmer or a community or a charity or someone's clever solution for battling climate change. Stories that end with phrases like, if this technology is scalable, this could potentially power 50 million homes a year. And then you never hear about it again. A deluge of individual profiles that are impossible to sort or organize in any way, and that I would guess have the effect of just overwhelming and fatiguing the viewer. Because after watching profiles on fires in Australia and California, droughts and floods on farms, a group of researchers working on carbon capture technology, none of this translates into an actionable idea. And this is to say nothing about how narrow the range of this climate ephemera is. You got stories about farmers in the Midwest or real estate in Florida. If there's a profile on the life of a climate refugee, it wasn't in any of the episodes I reviewed. But if they're not talking about a farmer's church group.
Interfaith Power and Light is a national organization devoted to using faith to fight the climate crisis.
They're talking about climate denial and Trump.
The president refused to acknowledge that climate change is playing a
President
role
Trump
in
says
the hotter
the jury
and front and
is
center
still out.
Many, if not every segment on those fires contained a Trump component. Yes, he is a science denier. Fox News is bad and Republicans pretend it isn't real because they either don't believe the science or don't care about the science. Distinction without a difference. But what is the purpose of spending so much time reminding their audience that Trump doesn't believe in science? They know this, and they don't even do it effectively. You'll hear things about how
his EPA has rolled back nearly 100 regulations.
Kind of as president, rolling back environmental regulation after environmental regulation.
But they rarely go over what they are. It's just something mentioned in passing. I mean, do an hour dedicated to the regulations he's rolled back and the consequences thereof. That'd be great. Rather than just imbuing your audience with inarticulable rage. Ali Velshi had a segment on a methane rollback, and PBS did one on car emissions. Out of everything I looked at, PBS was better than the other three, with regard to everything I'm talking about. But overall, everything was light on detail. Now, I want you to keep in mind the indomitable charm of the turncoat. The people who are, however unlikely and for whatever reason, on your side.
CPAC is an annual gathering for the reddest of red-blooded Republicans. 2 booths away from Climate Hustle 2 starring Kevin Sorbo, I met Kiara O'Brien.
Spotting a climate woke Republican who wants to have a carbon tax is like spotting a snow leopard in the wild. I mean, this So do you consider yourself sort of a Republican Greta?
No.
She is part of a group of glassy-eyed halfwits who occupy the incomprehensible position whereby we solve the climate crisis by squeezing a UBI out of a carbon tax until we stop extracting fossil fuel. And CNN thought it would be worth your time to show you the 10 of people who went to the climate march with signs that said "Climate Activist for Trump." There is no point in learning about these people. Now, a discussion about what a carbon tax would have to be to actually meet the deadlines the scientists have proposed, assuming a carbon tax isn't just a centrist half measure designed to offend the least amount of people, which it is. But this shit's just another stratum of weirdos who go to CPAC. And the news does not need to take time to tell you what they think. In fact, the news needs to spend a lot less time telling you about what other people think.
Tell us about the regional differences you see in your polling.
Frequently polls in the top 3 issues for Democratic voters.
A new CNN poll suggests this: climate change ranks #1 among issues for the party.
Polling is another infuriating feature of climate change segments, which get way more time than is useful, because what people think and what is true may be 2 different things. Not that polling is useless, not that it's not interesting, but discussing feelings on an issue is not really discussing an issue, and it can have the effect of training people to temper their electoral expectations. For example, how many times have you heard someone say that something is too radical? Not for them personally, but for others. And that's why they're not voting for X candidate. Or discussing Medicare for all, and someone cites the fact that it doesn't poll well once people find out that it gets rid of private insurance. Okay, fine. If you're in the communications department of a campaign, that all makes sense. But if you're not, just talk about the plan. And now you have someone who might intentionally vote against their interests because they think their interest is unpopular somewhere else. But it's the news's job to tell you about the Green New Deal, not to tell you what people who watch Fox News are scared of about the Green New Deal. Now, the news media operate largely under a logical fallacy, which is the alternative to evil is good. But in America, the alternative to evil is usually, if we're lucky, mediocrity. And so amazing cover is given to people who are simply the alternative to evil, namely Joe Biden. And it's possible to fairly evaluate his climate policy and juxtapose it to Trump's without also giving him cover. Trump is a climate denier, which is why Greenpeace gives his climate plan a 0. But they gave Biden's a 75, which they call a B+, but normally 75 is a C, and I would guess that if climate change is truly an existential threat, which it is, the work of a C student probably is insufficient. So what does the science say? And where do Biden and mainstream Democratic policymakers mostly fall? Well, in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 2018 report called Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, they give us some scenarios.
Transport is strongly decarbonised through a shift to electric vehicles. Several industry-sized plants for carbon capture and storage are installed and tested in the 2020s. Agriculture is intensified in countries with coordinated planning associated with a drastic decrease in food wastage. Adaptive measures, such as the establishment of corridors for the movement of species and parts of ecosystems, become a central practice within conservation management, and large areas are reforested with native trees. Societal preference for healthy diets reduces meat consumption and associated greenhouse gas emissions. Coastal communities struggle with increased inundation associated with rising sea levels and more frequent and intense rainfall. Small island developing states, coastal and low-lying areas have faced significant changes but have largely persisted in most regions. The Amazon is reasonably well preserved through avoided risk of possible large changes in regional temperature average, as well as through reduced deforestation. While some climate hazards become more frequent, timely adaptation measures help reduce the associated risks for most, although poor and disadvantaged groups continue to experience high climate risks to their livelihoods and well-being. So that's a scenario where fossil fuel use drops off a cliff starting tomorrow.
So that's the best case scenario. This is the second best case.
The international community continues to largely support the Paris Agreement and agrees in 2020 on reduction targets for CO2 emissions and timeframes for net zero emissions. However, these targets are not ambitious enough to reach stabilisation at 2 degrees Celsius warming, let alone 1.5 degrees Celsius. Temperatures are regularly above 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. Deadly heat waves in major cities, droughts in southern Europe, South Africa and the Western Sahel, and major flooding in Asia all lead to increasing levels of public unrest and political destabilisation. An emergency global summit in 2025 moves to much more ambitious climate targets. Disruptive technologies become crucial to face up to the adaptation measures needed. Temperature peaks at 2 degrees Celsius by the middle of the century. The intensive area required for the production of bioenergy, combined with increasing water stress, sets pressures on food prices. The health and well-being of people generally decreases from 2020, while the levels of poverty and disadvantage increase very significantly. And then there's scenario 3, which is the one we're really at risk of following if we don't change radically and quickly. CO2 emissions are reduced at local and national level, but efforts are limited and not always successful. 1.5 degrees Celsius warming is reached by 2030. Several catastrophic years occur while global temperature warming starts to approach 2 degrees Celsius. An unprecedented drought leads to large impacts on the Amazon rainforest, which is also affected by deforestation. Human health suffers. There are high levels of public unrest and political destabilisation due to the increasing climatic pressures. Massive investments in renewable energy often happen too late and are uncoordinated. Global mean warming reaches 3 degrees Celsius by 2100. The world as it was in 2020 is no longer recognisable.
Now keep in mind, the best case scenario still was not very good for a lot of people. But the question is the best case scenario the one that Biden sets us on a path for? Do fossil fuels start falling off a cliff with Biden's inauguration, regardless of who comes after him and reverses it? More likely than with another 4 years of Trump, but just because you're not an arsonist, that doesn't make you a firefighter. I mean, you look at Biden's plan. He says that he wants to double offshore wind by 2030. Well, wind only accounts for about 2% of our energy now, so we're going to bring it to more like 4%, I guess. He mentions tax incentives for creating carbon capture technology, a technology that doesn't exist yet, in the way we need it at least. But he doesn't mention anything specifically about installing solar on any wide scale, technology that is available now. He mentions the Paris Agreement a bunch, but like in scenario 2, that's non-binding, so it could amount to exactly nothing. And the fracking.
He is not opposed to fracking. It makes a lot of people upset who are liberal, more liberal in the party. This is really what's important. I think he is making this into a jobs program. The Civilian Climate Corps kind of reminds you of Roosevelt.
That the United States has been able to reduce its emissions, and in fact, and often meet the Paris climate goals because natural gas has lower emissions than oil.
The media have suddenly become these defenders of fracking simply because Joe Biden isn't planning on banning it. They act as if it's just a difference of opinion, and not this.
6 states have documented over 1,000 incidents of groundwater contamination.
It bubbles and hisses when it comes out.
Our water was good before they started drilling, and when they got done, it was bad.
Obviously, we have a problem here.
The neurological effects are very insidious.
Yes, and each molecule of methane, which of course is what natural gas is 84 times as powerful as a molecule of CO2 in trapping heat. So if you get 2 or 3% leakage, which some observers think we do, it wipes out that advantage.
And in fairness, sometimes, not every day, but sometimes an Al Gore is on to push back. But it should be reported generally as a failure that Biden isn't more aggressive on fracking. And they'll tell you this is because it scares people in Pennsylvania or wherever. Well, again, that's for the Biden campaign to worry about, not journalists. A journalist is supposed to be critical of those in power, not manufacture consent for their compromised policies. And especially after support for a fracking ban dropped 16% after Biden and Harris opposed it in the debates. Because remember, it's only because of pressure that Biden's climate plan moved 1,000 yards, as Jay Inslee put it. The media absolutely fail in elucidating how crucial it is that we get away from natural gas and other big methane emitters like animal agriculture, which is just totally ignored. Animal agriculture is responsible for 18% of greenhouse gas emissions. It's responsible for almost half of all methane emissions and almost half of all nitrous oxide emissions, which is the most powerful greenhouse gas, 300 times better at trapping heat than CO2. And at 18%, that's the same as transportation. So there is no good reason Joe Biden talks about filling the country with electric charging stations, which necessitate people buying electric cars, and never transitioning to a plant-based diet, which anyone can do right now. And if we continue to consume animal products at the rate that we are now, the agriculture sector could consume about 70% of the allowable budget for all greenhouse gases by mid-century. Cars, planes, buildings, everything else will have to fit into the remaining 30%. To know these things and to not at least aspire to a plant-based diet is to deny that science, that data. And for the media to ignore essentially a fifth of the cause of the climate crisis is climate denial. But one of the core components of corporate media is to never challenge their viewers. Build hate that focuses outward. Never reflect inward or challenge your audience with an inconvenient fact about their lifestyles. Good journalism should challenge you sometimes, but liberal media, with few exceptions, allow itself to be complicit in all the failures of the Democratic Party. Won't commit to a climate debate, fine. Won't commit to banning fracking, fine. Saying during a climate town hall that no one's going to have to give up their burgers, fine. No journalist is there to comment on what a flippant, data-denying statement that is regarding something that we're supposed to believe is an existential crisis. Yet apparently battling it will never cost us anything. How convenient.
One of the most powerful things we can be doing is to talk about it and to name it.
Talk to your friends about the climate, buy a paper straw, save the world. If Democrats are the party of science, it is by default. And with that, like and subscribe if you like this. It helps other people find it. And now I'm gonna hand it off to Chris Cuomo quoting Malcolm X for no reason.
When I is replaced by we, even illness becomes wellness. That's from Malcolm X. Isn't that great and apropos of right now?
That is great. Look at Rose, all woke. Malcolm X. Come on now, Rosalie.
Yeah, it was strong. It was strong.
That is
I didn't
strong.
even believe it. When she sent it to me, I was like, who said that?